The Galactic Council's formal assembly hall stretched across 2 kilometers of polished crystalline floor, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into architectural shadows that suggested infinite space above. Representatives from 47 civilizations occupied their designated zones, each area customized to accommodate the unique physiological and cultural requirements of its occupants. The aquatic delegation floated in their pressurized water spheres, while the silicon-based collective existed as geometric patterns of living mineral that shifted and reformed with their thoughts. At the center of this carefully orchestrated display of galactic unity stood a simple human woman who was systematically destroying every protocol the Council had established over 3,000 years of diplomatic tradition. Dr. Cassandra Vale, xenobiologist and diplomatic envoy from the Terran Republic, wore the formal attire mandated by Council dress codes, a flowing ceremonial robe of midnight blue fabric that caught and reflected the chamber's ambient lighting. The garment was perfectly tailored to human proportions and utterly conventional in every detail except for the massive skull that crowned her head like some ancient war trophy. Where diplomats traditionally wore elaborate headdresses denoting their homeworld and cultural heritage, Cassandra had chosen to display the bleached cranium of a creature that most council members recognized with visceral terror. The skull belonged to a Karvak Alpha, one of the apex predators from the forbidden zones of the galactic rim. 8 feet from snout to crown, its elongated muzzle contained rows of crystalline fangs that could pierce starship hull plating, while the distinctive spiral horns that curved back from its temples bore the ritual scarification that marked a pack leader. Most disturbing were the eye sockets, large enough to accommodate organs capable of seeing across multiple spectrums simultaneously, suggesting an intelligence that complemented the creature's obvious physical prowess. Ambassador Velthar of the Hegemonic Consortium, a mantis-like being whose jade carapace gleamed under the ceremonial lighting, clicked his mandibles in what his species considered barely controlled agitation. The dress code explicitly prohibits the wearing of metallic headgear or technological enhancement devices during formal assembly. Dr. Vale's accessory appears to violate multiple protocol standards. The regulation specifically mentions helmets, ceremonial crowns, and artificial constructs, Cassandra replied, her voice carrying easily across the vast chamber without amplification. This is biological material. Technically, it's no different from the bone jewelry worn by the skeletal communes or the living coral formations that crown the deep ocean delegation. The comparison drew uncomfortable shifting from several species. The skeletal communes wore ornaments carved from their own naturally shed bone material, while the deep ocean dwellers' coral crowns were living symbiotic organisms that had evolved alongside their civilization. Neither bore any resemblance to the mounted skull of a creature that had terrorized the galactic fringe for millennia. High Chancellor Zephys, whose crystalline form dominated the central dais like a living gemstone, resonated with harmonics that translated as formal displeasure. Dr. Vale, the Council's dress regulations exist to ensure that all participants feel secure and welcome during diplomatic proceedings. Your choice of attire seems calculated to achieve the opposite effect. My choice of attire reflects my professional experience and personal achievements, Cassandra replied with a slight smile that failed to reach her eyes. I was under the impression that the Council valued expertise and practical knowledge in its deliberations. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Most Council delegates were career diplomats, administrative functionaries, or political appointees whose contact with dangerous aliens was limited to carefully controlled academic settings. The suggestion that Cassandra's skull trophy represented superior qualifications was both accurate and diplomatically devastating. Councillor Threx of the warrior castes, a bipedal reptilian whose scarred hide told stories of countless battles, studied the skull with professional interest. His species had evolved on a world where physical prowess determined social status, and he recognized the implications of Cassandra's display better than most. That is an alpha skull, he observed, his gravelly voice carrying notes of respect. Karvak pack leaders are not easily killed. How did this specimen die? In single combat, Cassandra replied matter-of-factly, after it killed the rest of my research team on Kepler 442b. The statement sent ripples of reaction through the assembled delegates. Kepler 442b was a restricted world, officially designated as too dangerous for civilized contact. The planet's ecosystem had evolved under unusual gravitational and radiation conditions, producing life forms that were both exotic and extraordinarily lethal. Most species maintained automated survey drones to monitor such worlds from orbit, but actual surface missions were considered exercises in elaborate suicide. Your research team was conducting unauthorized investigation of a restricted biosphere? Ambassador Velthar asked, his mandibles clicking with what might have been disapproval or morbid curiosity. Our research was fully authorized by the Terran Science Directorate, Cassandra corrected. We were investigating reports of possible terraforming technology on the planet's northern continent. The mission was classified as high risk, but essential for understanding certain xenobiological phenomena. Terraforming technology? High Chancellor Zephys resonated with harmonic frequencies that suggested intense interest. The Council's records indicate no known technological civilizations in that system, which is what made the energy signatures so interesting, Cassandra replied. Someone or something was systematically altering the planet's atmospheric composition and surface geography. We needed to determine whether this represented natural geological processes or evidence of intelligence activity. The implications were staggering. Terraforming technology represented one of the holy grails of galactic civilization, the ability to transform hostile worlds into habitable environments. Most species had achieved limited success with small-scale atmospheric modification, but true planetary engineering remained theoretical. If someone had developed practical terraforming capabilities, it would shift the balance of galactic power dramatically. Your team discovered evidence of technological terraforming? Counselor Threx asked, his reptilian features sharpening with predatory interest. We discovered evidence of biological terraforming, Cassandra corrected. The atmospheric changes weren't being caused by machines. They were being caused by the Karvak pack that had established territory across the northern continent. This revelation drew audible reactions from several delegations. Biological terraforming was considered even more impossible than technological methods. The idea that non-sapient creatures could systematically alter planetary environments suggested capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence and environmental manipulation. Explain, High Chancellor Zephys commanded, his crystalline form shifting through color spectrums that indicated maximum attention. Karvaks aren't just apex predators, Cassandra continued. They're ecosystem engineers. Their digestive processes produce atmospheric compounds that alter local weather patterns, while their territorial behaviors create geological changes that redirect water flows and mineral distribution. Over time, a stable pack can transform an entire continent to better suit their hunting preferences. The concept was both fascinating and terrifying. Most galactic species viewed terraforming as a complex technological challenge requiring massive industrial infrastructure and centuries of careful environmental modification. The idea that it could be accomplished by biological processes operating on instinct was revolutionary. Your team was sent to study these creatures in their natural habitat, Ambassador Velthar observed. A mission that resulted in multiple casualties and single combat with an alpha specimen. Our initial approach was standard xenobiological protocol, Cassandra replied. Remote observation, careful data gathering, minimal environmental impact. We maintained a base camp 15 kilometers from the nearest Karvak territory and used automated sensors to monitor their behavior patterns. The memory of those first weeks on Kepler 442b remained vivid in Cassandra's mind. though she had learned to present the clinical details without betraying the emotional cost of what followed. The research station had been a masterwork of temporary construction, prefabricated modules designed to withstand the planet's harsh environmental conditions while providing complete life support for a team of 6 specialists. Dr. Hammond, the team's lead xenobiologist, had insisted on maintaining strict observation protocols that minimized any risk of contact with native life forms. Dr. Rodriguez, their atmospheric specialist, had focused on tracking the chemical changes that suggested large-scale environmental modification. The other team members, Geological Surveyor Williams, Communications Officer Park, and Security Specialist Jackson, had maintained the technical infrastructure that made their research possible. For 37 days, the mission had proceeded exactly according to plan. Their automated sensors had documented Karvak pack behavior across multiple hunting cycles, revealing social structures and territorial patterns that were far more complex than previous intelligence had suggested. The creatures weren't simply following instinctual patterns. They were actively modifying their environment in ways that suggested planning and adaptation. More importantly, they were doing it collectively, with different pack members specializing in different aspects of environmental manipulation. The breakthrough came when Dr. Hammond identified what appeared to be seasonal migration patterns. Cassandra continued, her voice maintaining the same matter-of-fact tone despite the weight of memory. The Karvak packs weren't randomly wandering across the continent. They were following carefully planned routes that maximized their environmental impact while avoiding resource depletion in any single area. High Chancellor Zephys shifted through several color phases, his crystalline form processing the implications of planned migration patterns in apparently non-sapient creatures. This suggests cognitive capabilities far beyond typical predator behavior, which is why we requested permission to establish closer observation posts, Cassandra replied. The ecological implications were too significant to study from a distance. We needed detailed behavioral data to understand how they coordinate their environmental modification activities. Ambassador Velthar's mandibles clicked in what Cassandra had learned to recognize as skeptical inquiry. Closer observation of apex predators requires extensive safety protocols. Your team was equipped for such operations? Security Specialist Jackson had combat experience with hostile xenofauna, Cassandra replied. Our equipment included standard deterrent systems and emergency extraction procedures. The mission profile rated the risk as acceptable given the scientific importance of the data. What she didn't mention was that Jackson's combat experience had been limited to dealing with scavengers and minor predators on worlds where human colonization was already established. None of them had truly understood what they were dealing with until it was too late to matter. The first indication of trouble came on day 38, Cassandra continued. Our automated sensors detected unusual movement patterns from the primary pack. Instead of following their established territorial routes, they were moving directly toward our observation posts. Counselor Threx leaned forward, his scarred reptilian features reflecting professional interest. The pack had detected your surveillance equipment? The pack had detected us, Cassandra corrected. Karvaks possess sensory capabilities that extend far beyond the visual spectrum. They can track electromagnetic signatures, chemical traces, and possibly even gravitational disturbances caused by technological activity. Our hidden observation posts were as obvious to them as beacon fires. The admission brought uncomfortable silence to the assembly hall. Most galactic species relied on advanced camouflage and stealth technology when studying dangerous life forms, operating under the assumption that superior technology could compensate for physical vulnerability. The idea that these assumptions might be fundamentally flawed was deeply unsettling. Your team initiated evacuation procedures? High Chancellor Zephys asked, his harmonic frequencies carrying notes of what might have been concern. Dr. Hammond attempted to initiate evacuation procedures, Cassandra replied. Unfortunately, Carvacs move considerably faster than our intelligence estimates had suggested. The pack reached our perimeter before we could complete emergency protocols. The attack had come without warning and with devastating efficiency. Jackson had managed to get off 2 shots from his deterrent weapon before the lead Carvac simply ran through the energy barrage as if it were heavy rain. Dr. Rodriguez had been working at an atmospheric monitoring station when the pack flanked their position, his final transmission cut off mid-word as massive claws found their target. The emergency beacon had activated automatically, but the nearest rescue vessel was 6 days away, under optimal conditions. The initial assault eliminated 4 team members within the first 10 minutes, Cassandra continued, her clinical tone masking memories that still disrupted her sleep. Dr. Hammond and I managed to reach the central shelter, but the Carvacs had already surrounded the compound. 2 survivors, surrounded by a pack of apex predators with no possibility of immediate rescue, Ambassador Velthar observed. Standard protocol would call for shelter-in-place tactics and passive defense until relief arrived. Standard protocol assumes that passive defense is possible, Cassandra replied. Carvac claws can penetrate most standard shelter materials, and their pack hunting tactics include systematic dismantling of defensive positions. Staying in the shelter would have simply delayed our deaths by a few hours. What she didn't explain was the sound, the methodical scraping of claws against metal as the creatures systematically tested every surface of their refuge, learning its weaknesses and planning their approach. Dr. Hammond had spent those hours frantically reviewing their xenobiological data, searching for some insight that might suggest a survival strategy. He had been a brilliant scientist and a decent man who had died because he couldn't accept that all his knowledge was useless against creatures that existed beyond the comfortable boundaries of academic theory. Dr. Hammond was killed during a reconnaissance attempt, Cassandra continued. He believed that understanding their pack hierarchy might suggest negotiation possibilities. The Alpha killed him before he could transmit his findings. The truth was more complex and more painful. Hammond had volunteered to attempt contact because he couldn't bear to remain passive while death approached. He had been convinced that intelligence could overcome instinct, that rational communication could bridge the gap between species. The Alpha had killed him because Carvacs didn't negotiate. They simply removed obstacles that stood between them and their objectives, which left you alone, surrounded by a pack of creatures that had already demonstrated their ability to eliminate trained specialists, Counselor Threx noted. How did you survive? I stopped thinking like a scientist and started thinking like prey, Cassandra replied. The transformation from academic researcher to survival-focused combatant had required abandoning everything Cassandra thought she understood about proper xenobiological protocol. Scientific observation demanded objectivity, careful documentation, and minimal environmental impact. Survival demanded accepting that she was no longer an observer, but a participant in a predator-prey relationship that would end with either her death or the pack's elimination. The compound's emergency supplies included standard defensive equipment, Cassandra continued, her voice maintaining its clinical detachment despite memories that remained viscerally immediate. Energy weapons, barrier generators, and emergency communication gear, all useless against creatures that had evolved to hunt in environments where technology provides no advantage. What the supplies had included was a single piece of equipment that most xenobiologists never expected to use, a primitive kinetic weapon designed for emergency situations where energy weapons might be ineffective or dangerous. The projectile rifle had been included almost as an afterthought, a backup system for scenarios that sophisticated scientists weren't supposed to encounter. It fired dense metal slugs using chemical propulsion, a technology so archaic that most galactic species had abandoned it millennia ago. I spent 6 hours studying the pack's behavioral patterns through the shelter's sensor array, Cassandra continued. Carvacs are incredibly intelligent, but their intelligence follows specific patterns that can be predicted if you understand their evolutionary priorities. High Chancellor Zephys resonated with harmonic frequencies that suggested intense interest. You identified exploitable weaknesses in their hunting behavior? I identified the fact that they were treating me as standard prey, Cassandra replied. Their attack patterns assumed I would follow typical prey responses: panic, flight attempts, or passive hiding. They weren't prepared for prey that actively studied their methods and adapted accordingly. The insight had come during her analysis of their systematic dismantling of the compound's outer defenses. The Karvax weren't simply destroying everything they encountered. They were following a specific sequence that reflected optimal hunting efficiency. First, they eliminated escape routes. Then they removed defensive advantages. Finally, they forced their prey into increasingly smaller spaces until resistance became impossible. The pattern was perfect for dealing with creatures that acted on instinct, but it could be exploited by prey intelligent enough to recognize and counter it. The pack's alpha maintained a consistent position during their assault, Cassandra continued. He directed pack movements from a specific vantage point that provided optimal oversight of the compound while remaining protected from potential defensive fire. Standard alpha behavior, but it created a predictable target pattern. Ambassador Velthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval or concern. You planned an assassination attempt against the pack leader? I planned a single shot that would either eliminate the primary threat or provoke the pack into making tactical errors, Cassandra corrected. Killing the alpha would disrupt their coordination and create opportunities for escape. Missing would force them to commit to a direct assault rather than methodical siege tactics. What she didn't explain was the psychological preparation required to make such a decision. Academic training emphasized avoiding harm to research subjects, treating even dangerous specimens as valuable sources of scientific knowledge. Deciding to kill the alpha meant abandoning her identity as a researcher and accepting her role as a combatant in a fight where intellectual curiosity was a fatal luxury. The shot required positioning that exposed me to immediate retaliation, Cassandra continued. The shelter's emergency exit provided a clear line of sight to the alpha's position, but using it meant abandoning the compound's protective systems. Counselor Threx leaned forward with predatory interest. You emerged from shelter to engage in single combat with an alpha Karvac? I emerged from shelter to take one shot at maximum effective range, Cassandra corrected. Single combat wasn't the plan. It was what happened when the plan didn't work perfectly. The truth was that the plan had almost worked. The kinetic rifle's projectile had struck the alpha center mass with enough force to penetrate its natural armor and cause significant internal damage. But Karvax possessed redundant organ systems and pain tolerance that exceeded most biological norms. Instead of dying, the alpha had been wounded enough to become enraged while retaining sufficient capability to hunt. The alpha's response to injury was immediate and direct, Cassandra continued. It abandoned tactical coordination and launched a personal assault while the rest of the pack maintained perimeter security. This created the one-on-one engagement that I had hoped to avoid. High Chancellor Zephys shifted through several color phases that indicated complex emotional processing. Single combat with a wounded Alpha Karvac represents circumstances that most military specialists would consider unsurvivable. Most military specialists train to fight opponents that follow recognizable tactical doctrine, Cassandra replied. Karvacs don't follow doctrine. They follow instinct refined by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Fighting them requires abandoning conventional combat assumptions. The actual fight had been nothing like the elegant duels portrayed in galactic entertainment media. There had been no exchange of honorable blows or demonstration of superior technique. The Alpha had simply tried to kill her using the most efficient methods available, while Cassandra had focused on surviving long enough to inflict fatal damage through accumulated wounds. The Alpha's first charge knocked me 15 meters backward and broke 3 ribs, Cassandra continued matter-of-factly. Its claws penetrated my emergency armor and scored my left shoulder, but the kinetic impact separated us before it could achieve a killing grip. What she didn't describe was the sound of her own bones breaking, or the taste of blood in her mouth as damaged organs began failing. The Alpha had been playing with her, demonstrating its superiority before delivering a death blow that would satisfy its sense of predatory dominance. It had expected her to collapse or flee, creating opportunities for a clean kill. I used the separation to reload and fire again, Cassandra continued. The second shot struck the creature's left hindquarter, severing major muscle groups and compromising its mobility. This changed the tactical situation significantly. A mobility-compromised Alpha becomes more dangerous rather than less, Counselor Threx observed with professional appreciation. Wounded predators fight with desperation that exceeds their normal capabilities. Which is why I didn't wait for it to adapt to its injuries, Cassandra replied. I closed to contact range while it was still processing the damage. The decision to attack rather than attempt escape had violated every survival instinct humans had evolved over millions of years. But Cassandra had recognized that the Alpha's injuries would force it to end the fight quickly, using whatever capabilities remained to achieve a decisive victory. Retreat would have simply provided time for the creature to develop new tactics that accounted for its reduced mobility. The final moments of single combat had been a blur of violence that Cassandra's memory preserved in fragmentary images rather than continuous narrative. She retained vivid impressions of the Alpha's massive form lunging toward her with claws extended, the metallic scent of its blood mixing with the ozone smell of the planet's unusual atmosphere, and the jarring impact as her third shot found its target at point-blank range. Most clearly, she remembered the creature's eyes in the instant before death, intelligent, furious, and carrying something that might have been respect for an opponent that had exceeded its expectations. The Alpha died from massive neurological trauma caused by a kinetic projectile fired at contact range, Cassandra continued, her clinical description stripping emotion from memory. Death was instantaneous, but the creature's final reflexive strike opened my chest armor and inflicted wounds that required immediate medical attention. What she didn't mention was the 26 hours she had spent bleeding in the wreckage of their research compound, using emergency medical supplies to keep herself alive while the rest of the pack circled the area in confusion. Alpha death had disrupted their coordination as predicted, but it had also made them unpredictable. Without clear leadership, they had alternated between retreat and random aggression, making any movement beyond the immediate vicinity impossibly dangerous. The pack's response to Alpha death was immediate dispersal, Cassandra continued. Karvak's social structure depends on clear hierarchy, and Alpha death creates temporary chaos that typically lasts until a new leader emerges through combat. High Chancellor Zephys resonated with harmonic frequencies that suggested both fascination and concern. You remained in the area during this succession period? I remained in the area until rescue vessels arrived, Cassandra replied. Moving with serious injuries while subordinate pack members were establishing new territorial boundaries would have been inadvisable. Ambassador Velthar's mandibles clicked in what Cassandra had learned to recognize as morbid curiosity. 26 hours alone with a disrupted Karvak pack and significant combat injuries. How did you prevent infection or predation during recovery? Emergency medical protocols and alpha pheromones, Cassandra replied matter-of-factly. The statement drew immediate attention from several delegations. Most galactic species understood the concept of chemical communication, but few had practical experience with using predator scent markers as defensive tools. Alpha pheromones? Counselor Threx asked, his reptilian features sharpening with professional interest. Karvak alphas mark their territory with scent compounds that warn other predators to avoid the area, Cassandra explained. The dead alpha's scent glands remained active for several hours after death. I extracted sufficient pheromone concentrate to establish a defensive perimeter around my position. What she didn't explain was the psychological cost of that decision. Using the alpha's remains as protective camouflage had required handling the creature's corpse while fighting off infection and blood loss. The process had been necessary for survival, but it had also been a visceral reminder that she had crossed a fundamental boundary between academic observation and personal participation in the predator-prey relationships she had spent years studying from safe distances. Rescue vessels arrived 31 hours after the initial attack, Cassandra continued. By that time, the pack had dispersed and a new alpha had emerged from the succession combat. The area was considered secure for emergency extraction. And the deceased alpha's remains? High Chancellor Zephys asked, his harmonic frequencies carrying notes of what might have been diplomatic concern. Salvaged for scientific analysis, Cassandra replied, her hand moving unconsciously toward the massive skull that crowned her head. Karvak physiology remains poorly understood, and specimens of alpha quality are extremely rare. The research value justified the extraction effort. This was the moment when several delegates began to understand the full implications of Cassandra's presence in the council chambers. She wasn't simply wearing a trophy taken from a defeated enemy. She was displaying evidence of scientific research that had cost 5 lives and required surviving circumstances that most galactic citizens would consider impossible. Dr. Vale, Ambassador Velthar said carefully, the skull you wear represents significant scientific value. Have your analysis results been shared with the broader xenobiological community? My analysis results are currently under review by the Terran Science Directorate, Cassandra replied. Preliminary findings suggest that Karvak pack behavior may represent the most sophisticated example of biological terraforming ever documented. The implication hung in the chamber like a challenge to everything the assembled delegates thought they understood about planetary engineering and ecosystem manipulation. If humans had developed practical methods for studying and potentially controlling biological terraforming processes, it would shift the balance of galactic technological development dramatically. Preliminary findings? High Chancellor Zephys pressed, his crystalline form shifting through color phases that indicated maximum attention. Karvak environmental modification appears to follow planned sequences that require generational coordination, Cassandra replied. Pack leaders don't just alter their immediate environment, they implement changes designed to benefit their offspring and descendants. This suggests cognitive capabilities that approach sapient-level planning. Counselor Threx clicked his mandibles in what might have been appreciation or alarm. You're suggesting that these creatures possess civilization-level intelligence despite their apparent lack of technology? I'm suggesting that they possess problem-solving capabilities that don't require technology because their biological systems are sufficiently advanced to accomplish the same objectives, Cassandra corrected. They are living terraforming engines that operate through instinct refined by intelligence. The concept challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between intelligence and technological development. Most galactic species had achieved their current status through increasingly sophisticated tool use, but Karvaks had apparently reached similar capabilities through biological adaptation that eliminated the need for external technology. The research implications are obvious, Cassandra continued. Understanding Karvak terraforming biology could revolutionize planetary engineering across the galaxy. The practical applications for world modification, ecosystem restoration, and environmental adaptation could benefit every species in the Council. Provided that such research can be conducted safely, Ambassador Velthar observed pointedly, your expedition suffered 83% casualties during initial contact attempts. My expedition was conducting research under protocols designed for non-hostile xenofauna, Cassandra replied. Future studies would require different approaches based on practical understanding of Karvak capabilities and behavior patterns. The silence that followed Cassandra's statement was heavy with unspoken implications. Every delegate in the chamber understood that she was proposing additional expeditions to study creatures that had proven capable of eliminating trained research teams with minimal effort. The scientific potential was extraordinary, but the practical risks seemed to exceed any reasonable cost-benefit analysis. Dr. Vale, High Chancellor Zephys resonated with harmonic frequencies that carried formal diplomatic weight. The Council appreciates your detailed account of the Kepler 442b incident. However, your presence here today was requested to address concerns about human expansion into contested border regions, not to propose additional high-risk xenobiological research. The redirect was diplomatically elegant and strategically necessary. Cassandra's testimony had been far more detailed and disturbing than the Council had anticipated, but it had also demonstrated exactly the kind of aggressive risk-taking that made other species nervous about human activities in unexplored space. My presence here demonstrates that humans possess practical experience with the kind of threats that other species encounter in border regions, Cassandra replied smoothly. The skull I wear isn't just a trophy. It's evidence that we've faced Grade 7 hostiles and developed effective countermeasures. Ambassador Velthar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation that his diplomatic training couldn't quite suppress. Your effective countermeasures resulted in the death of an entire research team and required single combat with an apex predator. Most species would classify such outcomes as catastrophic failures rather than successful operations. Most species would have lost their entire team without gathering any useful intelligence, Cassandra countered. We lost 5 people, but we gained unprecedented insight into biological terraforming processes and practical knowledge about Karvak behavior that could save thousands of lives in future encounters. The exchange highlighted a fundamental difference in how humans and other galactic species evaluated risk and success. Where most civilizations prioritized minimizing casualties and avoiding dangerous contact, humans apparently viewed acceptable losses as reasonable costs for achieving significant objectives. The concern, High Chancellor Zephys said carefully, is that human willingness to accept such casualties in pursuit of knowledge or territorial expansion creates instability in regions where other species prefer cautious development approaches. Our willingness to accept risks allows us to provide services that other species cannot, Cassandra replied. We can establish contact with hostile civilizations, conduct research in dangerous environments, and secure territories that would otherwise remain inaccessible to galactic development. Counselor Threx leaned forward with predatory interest. You're proposing that humans serve as expendable scouts for galactic expansion efforts? We're proposing that humans serve as effective scouts for galactic expansion efforts, Cassandra corrected with a slight smile. There's a significant difference between expendable and willing to accept necessary risks. The distinction was crucial, but troubling. Expendable resources could be sacrificed without regard for their individual value, but effective scouts represented valuable assets that required protection and support. The question was whether other species could trust human risk assessment or whether their apparent willingness to charge into danger represented a fundamental inability to evaluate threats rationally. Dr. Vale, Ambassador Velthar said formally, the Council's dress regulations exist to ensure that all participants feel secure during diplomatic proceedings. Your choice to wear predator remains seems designed to intimidate rather than reassure. My choice reflects my qualifications for this discussion, Cassandra replied. When the Council debates territorial expansion into dangerous regions, I believe it's appropriate to include representatives who have actual experience with the kind of threats such expansion will encounter. And if other delegates find your appearance threatening? High Chancellor Zephys asked. Cassandra's smile widened slightly, carrying a note of genuine amusement. Then they're demonstrating exactly why humans are necessary for frontier operations. If the sight of a dead predator's skull is intimidating, How would they react to encountering a living one? The question hung in the chamber like a challenge that most delegates couldn't answer. Their species had evolved past the point where physical courage was a daily necessity, but human expansion into contested territories would require confronting threats that technological superiority couldn't always overcome. The skull I wear belonged to a creature that killed 4 trained specialists in less than 10 minutes, Cassandra continued. It was faster, stronger, and more intelligent than anything most of you have encountered outside academic simulations. It could have torn apart this entire assembly in the time it takes to complete a formal introduction. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, their various forms of body language conveying shared unease at the vivid description of predatory capabilities. The alpha skull looming above Cassandra's head suddenly seemed less like a diplomatic violation and more like a tangible reminder of dangers that existed beyond the civilized boundaries of council space. Yet humans defeated this creature in single combat, Counselor Threx observed, his scarred reptilian features reflecting professional appreciation. This suggests capabilities that most military assessments have underestimated. This suggests that humans have developed practical methods for dealing with threats that other species prefer to avoid, Cassandra corrected. We don't seek out dangerous encounters, but we've learned to survive them when avoidance isn't possible. And you believe this experience qualifies humanity for expanded territorial access? High Chancellor Zephys asked. I believe this experience qualifies humanity to explore territories that other species consider too dangerous for development, Cassandra replied. There are entire star systems marked as restricted because automated surveys detected hostile life forms. We could establish human research stations in those systems and provide detailed intelligence that would enable safe development by other species. The proposal was both practical and unsettling. Human willingness to accept risks that other species considered unacceptable could indeed open new territories for galactic expansion, but it would also establish humanity as the primary source of intelligence about dangerous regions. Such information represented significant strategic value that could be leveraged for political and economic advantage. Human territorial expansion has already generated complaints from several member species, Ambassador Velthar noted. Your aggressive colonization practices create conflicts with established territorial boundaries. Our colonization practices focus on worlds that other species have deemed unsuitable for development, Cassandra replied. We're not competing for garden worlds or established territories. We're claiming planets that everyone else has written off as too dangerous or too difficult to exploit. The chamber's ambient lighting had shifted subtly during the extended session, creating longer shadows that made Cassandra's skull trophy appear even more imposing against the ceremonial backdrop. As delegates processed the implications of her testimony, the massive Karvak cranium served as a constant reminder that human capabilities extended far beyond the comfortable boundaries of academic theory. Dr. Vale, High Chancellor Zephys said with careful formality, your account of the Kepler 442b incident has been illuminating. However, the Council's immediate concern involves human territorial claims in the Andromeda border region, where your expansion efforts have encountered resistance from established civilizations. The redirect brought their discussion back to the political realities that had prompted Cassandra's appearance before the Council. Human expansion into contested border regions wasn't simply about scientific research or dangerous wildlife. It involved direct contact with hostile alien civilizations that viewed human presence as an existential threat. The Andromeda border conflicts involve 3 separate species that have rejected all diplomatic contact with galactic civilization, Cassandra replied. They've destroyed every automated probe sent into their territories and fired on any vessel that approaches their established boundaries. Standard Council policy classifies them as non-contact civilizations pending development of appropriate diplomatic protocols. which could require decades of careful preparation, Ambassador Velthar observed. Rushing such contacts risks creating conflicts that could destabilize the entire border region. Rushing such contacts risks immediate violence, Cassandra agreed, but avoiding them indefinitely risks missing opportunities for peaceful resolution before these species develop technologies that make contact impossible. The tactical assessment reflected human thinking about diplomatic timing and strategic windows. Where most galactic species preferred to wait until optimal conditions emerged, humans apparently believed that early contact carried advantages that outweighed immediate risks. The border conflicts have already resulted in human casualties, High Chancellor Zephys noted. 3 colonial expeditions have reported hostile contact with unknown weapon systems. How do you justify continuing expansion into territories where such resistance is inevitable? The same way I justified remaining on Kepler 442b after the Karvak attack, Cassandra replied. Someone needs to gather intelligence that will enable successful future operations. Better to lose a few expeditions now than to lose entire fleets later when these species have time to develop more advanced defensive capabilities. The logic was brutally practical and utterly alien to most council members' diplomatic experience. Their species had learned to resolve conflicts through negotiation and compromise, but humans apparently viewed controlled escalation as a viable strategy for establishing communication with hostile civilizations. Dr. Vale, Counselor Threx said with professional directness, "You wear the skull of a creature you killed in personal combat." This suggests that humans view violence as an acceptable solution to complex problems. I wear evidence that humans can survive violent encounters that other species would find impossible, Cassandra corrected. Violence isn't our preferred solution. It's simply a tool we're prepared to use when other options fail. Her hand moved unconsciously to touch the massive skull, fingers tracing the ritual scarification that marked the creature's pack leadership status. The gesture was casual but pointed, emphasizing the practical reality of her qualifications for discussions about dangerous contact situations. The border conflicts require exactly this kind of preparation, Cassandra continued. We're dealing with species that communicate through displays of strength rather than diplomatic protocols. They need to understand that humans can't be eliminated through simple intimidation before they'll consider peaceful coexistence. And if peaceful coexistence proves impossible, High Chancellor Zephys asked, then other species will know what they're dealing with before committing resources to contact attempts that would result in catastrophic losses, Cassandra replied without hesitation. Human casualties in border conflicts provide intelligence that prevents other species from making the same mistakes on a larger scale. The statement crystallized everything that made the assembled delegates uncomfortable about human expansion policies. Where most galactic civilizations viewed casualties as failures to be avoided through better planning, humans apparently treated them as acceptable costs for gathering tactical intelligence that benefited everyone. You speak of human deaths as though they were routine operational expenses, Ambassador Velthar observed, his mandibles clicking with what might have been moral disapproval. I speak of human deaths as meaningful sacrifices that serve larger strategic objectives, Cassandra corrected. Every person we lose in border conflicts dies gathering information that could save thousands of lives in future encounters. But surely rational risk assessment would suggest alternative approaches, High Chancellor Zephys protested, his crystalline form cycling through color phases that indicated philosophical distress. Cassandra's smile carried a note of gentle condescension that she didn't attempt to hide. Chancellor, with respect, rational risk assessment assumes that all parties involved share similar values and decision-making processes. The species we've encountered in the border region don't appear to value individual survival over territorial integrity. The implication was devastating to Council diplomatic theory. Most galactic species had evolved past the point where territorial disputes required violent resolution, but humans were apparently dealing with civilizations that hadn't reached such enlightened perspectives. These border species view human expansion as existential threats rather than diplomatic opportunities, Cassandra continued. They respond to peaceful contact attempts with immediate violence because they interpret restraint as weakness rather than good faith. How can you be certain of their motivations? Counselor Threx asked, his scarred reptilian features reflecting professional skepticism. Because we've captured examples of their communication systems and weapons technology, Cassandra replied matter-of-factly. Dead enemies provide excellent intelligence opportunities if you're prepared to exploit them properly. The casual reference to capturing enemy technology and communications equipment sent another ripple of unease through the assembly. Most galactic species approached military conflicts with emphasis on minimizing damage to enemy capabilities, viewing such destruction as wasteful and counterproductive to eventual peaceful resolution. Dr. Vale, High Chancellor Zephys said carefully, "Are you suggesting that humans deliberately seek violent confrontations in order to acquire enemy intelligence?" "I'm suggesting that humans make productive use of violent confrontations that enemy species initiate," Cassandra corrected. "We don't start these fights, but we make sure we learn everything possible from them." Her hand moved to the skull again, a gesture that was becoming habitual and increasingly pointed. The massive cranium served as physical evidence that humans could not only survive encounters that should have been fatal, but could turn such encounters into opportunities for advancement. The border conflicts have provided unprecedented intelligence about non-council military technologies, Cassandra continued. Energy weapons that operate on principles our physicists are still analyzing. Defensive systems that suggest industrial capabilities far beyond current galactic norms, and coordination protocols that imply political structures unlike anything in our databases. The revelations transformed the discussion from moral philosophy to strategic intelligence. If humans were gathering actionable intelligence about advanced hostile civilizations, such information represented value that could outweigh concerns about their aggressive expansion methods. This intelligence has been shared with Council Scientific Directorates? Ambassador Velthar asked, his diplomatic training overriding his earlier moral objections. Selected findings have been transmitted through appropriate channels, Cassandra replied with diplomatic vagueness. Complete intelligence sharing would require formal agreements regarding human territorial claims and expansion rights. The negotiating position was elegant and ruthless. Humans possessed intelligence that other species needed, but they were prepared to use that intelligence as leverage for achieving political objectives that the Council had previously rejected. You're proposing to trade military intelligence for territorial concessions, Counselor Threx observed, with something approaching admiration. We're proposing to provide services that other species cannot, Cassandra replied. Intelligence gathering in hostile territories, first contact with aggressive civilizations, and security operations in regions that everyone else considers too dangerous for development. At the cost of how many lives? High Chancellor Zephys asked. Cassandra's expression became serious for the first time during the session. At the cost of however many lives are necessary to ensure that galactic civilization can continue expanding safely. Someone has to be willing to pay that price, and humans have proven that we can do so effectively. The chamber fell silent as delegates processed the full implications of her statement. They were being offered a bargain that was both attractive and morally troubling. Human willingness to accept casualties and take risks in exchange for territorial concessions and political recognition. The skull you wear, Ambassador Velthar said finally, represents more than scientific achievement or personal courage. It represents a fundamentally different approach to galactic expansion than the Council has previously considered. It represents proof that such approaches can be successful, Cassandra agreed. The creature that owned this skull killed 4 trained specialists and nearly killed me, But it's dead, and I'm here addressing the Galactic Council, wearing its remains as a crown." She stood slowly, the massive skull shifting slightly as she moved, its empty eye sockets seeming to regard the assembled delegates with predatory assessment. The question before this council isn't whether humans are too aggressive or too willing to accept risks. The question is whether you want our services or whether you prefer to expand galactic civilization at the pace that your own risk tolerance permits. The ultimatum was delivered with perfect diplomatic courtesy, but its implications were unmistakable. Humans would continue expanding into dangerous territories with or without council approval, but formal cooperation would provide benefits that isolation could not. "This council will require time to consider the implications of your testimony," High Chancellor Zephys said formally. "The session will adjourn pending further deliberation." As delegates began filing out in their various forms of locomotion, Cassandra remained standing at the chamber's center, the Karvak skull looming above the dispersing assembly like a monument to human capability and alien mortality. Several delegates cast backward glances as they departed, their expressions suggesting that they would remember both her words and her appearance long after the formal proceedings concluded. Ambassador Velthar was the last to leave, pausing near Cassandra's position with mandibles clicking in what she had learned to recognize as thoughtful consideration. "Dr. Vale," he said quietly, "your presentation has been effective, but wearing the remains of a creature you killed in single combat sends a message that extends beyond diplomatic protocol." "What message do you think it sends?" Cassandra asked with genuine curiosity. "That humans are not prey," Velthar replied after a moment of consideration, "and that those who treat you as such do so at their own peril." Cassandra's smile was sharp and satisfied. "Then I've accomplished exactly what I came here to do." As the Velkarian delegate departed, Cassandra remained alone in the vast chamber, surrounded by the architectural symbols of galactic civilization and crowned with the skull of a creature that had never learned to fear anything until the moment it died. The dress code had banned helmets, so she had worn the predator's skull instead, and in doing so had delivered a message that no diplomatic protocol could have conveyed as effectively. The stars beyond the chamber's viewports beckoned with their promise of unknown dangers and unprecedented opportunities. For species like those represented in the council, those stars represented risks to be carefully evaluated and gradually approached. For humans like Dr. Cassandra Vale, they represented challenges to be met directly, whatever the cost. The skull would serve as a reminder of that difference for as long as galactic civilization remembered the day a human woman wore death itself as a crown and made it beautiful.